Hey everybody, today I'm going to be talking about some of the best films that I've seen so far this year. We're kind of right at the halfway point, and often in my mind I like to do kind of like a progress report. Don't know why. I certainly haven't seen every film this year, and I'm sure that you guys will let me know what films I need to still see that are currently out, but I have seen more films this year than I normally do. So I don't know, this felt appropriate. But before we get into that, I'm going to plug my website. As always, it is deepfocuslens.com. I am an artist. I do commission portraits, and I also sell prints of my work. If that is something that you are interested in, you can always go to the website below. And if you have a question about a commission or a print, you can always email me as well. My email is in the description box below. So I'm just talking about several films here, just a little handful of them, and it's going to be in no particular order. But I will start with Crimes of the Future. This was directed by David Cronenberg, and this is Cronenberg sort of returning to his roots and, like the body horror and sci-fi, which is kind of what made him famous. He loves body horror and looking at it from a very cerebral angle and kind of studying social patterns that exist around it, and also kind of looking at destruction versus sensationalism. And I've always loved his approach because it's very succinct, it's very clear, and I love the way that he subverts it because he avoids messiness, which is very rare for a lot of filmmakers. And he delves into science fiction and body horror in ways that we don't normally see. Again, when it comes to our relationships with our own bodies and our relationship with desire and cinema, again, among other things. Now, even though I did enjoy the film, I don't think it's quite on the level of a lot of the really great Cronenberg works that kind of deal with a lot of the same subject matters. I do feel like it lacks a lot of the world building that you might see in other films of his, and especially kind of that cinematic ambition and just that really special, really pointed artistic point of view that he often has conceptually. It's just not quite sharp in the same way. But I still found myself really enjoying a lot of elements that are classic Cronenberg. Like I said, I love the humor of it. I love kind of the satirical aspects of it. And I love the angle of facing things more through the eyes of the Viggo Mortensen character, who is an aging artist. And I think there are some parallels certainly between him and somebody like Cronenberg, maybe not even consciously. But yeah, I do look at this film overall as a very interesting metaphor for the creative process and the creator. And I don't know, at this point in his career, he is much older now, Cronenberg. I don't know, it just felt kind of appropriate to me. He hasn't lost his sense of humor. I thought that Kristen Stewart in particular gave a fantastic performance in this. She's a cartoon. She's like this fidgety, anxious type of person, and her delivery is really brilliant. And yet she's also very cinematic and this intriguing figure peripherally throughout the film. So yeah, one of the highlights. But yeah, it's an enjoyable film. Next, I'm going to go with The Batman, and this was directed by Matt Reeves. This film was a huge surprise to me. I walked into it, I don't think I had even seen a trailer, and I just wasn't particularly interested in it. Obviously, it feels a little bit redundant, naturally, and maybe a little bit unnecessary. And I tend to be kind of cynical when it comes to the industry currently, and I don't have a lot of faith in it when it comes to reviving a lot of these major franchises, but I was pleasantly surprised by this film. This film was maybe the closest, just in terms of aesthetic and everything, to what I have always wanted a live-action Batman to be like. This really did nail it, because I like the Art Deco, the noir, the gothic aspects, but it also has like a twinkle in the eye. It's a little bit cheeky. That's really what I love the most about Batman. And I do think they capture a lot of that, and I think the world building is fabulous in this film, and it's just really, really cinematic. It's a cinematic experience, a proper one, in a way that I personally just don't feel very much anymore. But when it comes to all the different elements of the film, if there's one thing that I think ties it all together and since it, elevates it, it's definitely the score by Michael Giacchino. It is just tremendous. So, so tremendous. It captures everything you could want when it comes to Batman. It has just a little bit of that comic book cheekiness to it, that brassiness that we love, and yet it's also very cinematic and very, very serious and symphonic, traditional sounding. And again, it is Michael Giacchino, and so you're naturally going to get more of an academic sound, I think. Maybe some people weren't crazy about this particular portrayal of Batman as an anti-hero. It didn't bother me much, but as I've said before, I think Wayne is inherently kind of a contradictory anti-hero and not particularly interesting as a hero. But I feel like this film was kind of more aware of that to a degree, so I guess that's part of why it didn't bother me. But I do like that it is proper film noir, and I like that Batman gets to be a detective again, because that's always how I saw him. Where you have a place that feels absolutely like Gotham. I feel like it's been a long time since we've had that kind of experience where, it's just swarming with all kinds of different, rogues gallery villains that we adore. Now, sure, this is a very flawed film, and I would never argue against that at all, because it does feel like if you want to watch a better version of this, because there certainly is a better version of this, just watch Seven. Watch David Fincher's Seven, or watch something even better than that, or I should say more sophisticated, in my view, more elevated. Watch Zodiac, also by David Fincher. I do think the Riddler here in The Batman, while he is compelling in some way, certainly interesting, the build up to revealing that character, he also leaves a lot to be desired. And I feel like the climax of the film, especially the third act, it really deflates a lot of the tension. We're not really sticking the landing like we could have in the way that something like Seven does. It really follows the same trajectory as Seven, but Seven just really takes it all the way. But this was fun, man. I've always really loved Batman ever since I was a kid, and so this really did kind of satisfy my appetite there. And I've seen it twice, and even though the second time I was kind of ripping it apart, I somehow enjoyed it even more the second time, and I don't know, I think that's a good sign. So yeah, this is one of the movies that I probably enjoyed the most this year. Next, I'm going to talk about RRR, and this is directed by S.S. Rajamouli, and this is a Tollywood film. It was released on Netflix, and so that is why it is causing a bit of a stir, I think, with Western audiences, and I think for good reason. This is the film I've had the most fun watching this entire year, because there's just a real honest energy to it, and a primality, and a sense of drama, a sense of emotion, and more importantly, I think a warrior spirit. I love a warrior spirit. This film is very clear, very straightforward. It employs a lot of different cliches. It's very over the top, as I've said, and it's just shameless in the boisterousness of everything. And I think that is why I like it, because it allows for all kinds of very jarring tonal shifts to exist in a very believable way. Because this is an epic that has a lot of Eastern philosophy and such in it, but it's also a very loud action film and a joyous musical at the same time. And it just comes together in a way that is cohesive and satisfying, and it's one of those throw caution to the wind type of movies for me. I'm drawn to movies that have a lot of passion and energy in them, and this certainly has all of that. I'm also somebody who's very drawn to like adrenaline, or movies that give you that feeling of, wanting to get your adrenaline pumping. And this film has that quality in a way that really inspires you. And like I said, when I reviewed the film, it feels kind of like a mix of Inglourious Bastards and Mad Max Fury Road and like a 1950s MGM musical. And it's the kind of movie I feel like you'll smile at least once in, or you'll be entertained by it in at least a certain way, or I hope you will be. Next, I'm talking about Climax, and this was directed by Gaspar Noé. This is also a very surprising film. I've talked so much about Gaspar Noé on this channel, probably too much at this point. But he's just a filmmaker, like I've said many times, that I connect to, and I connect to certain aspects of his sensationalism and the way that he depicts it. But this film I find really interesting just because, up until this point, maybe his last couple of films, I enjoy them, but I felt as though he had gone maybe as far as he could in that direction, in this sort of like shock value formula that he has created and he's become known for. So many of his films are fantastic, yet they start to feel redundant in that atmosphere of the depleted pleasure centers. But it felt like he found a ceiling, and like he needed to find a new way to package this kind of filmmaking. And his ideas often stem from, like you're framing psychedelia and existence and destruction in all kinds of different ways. But here he really stepped out of his comfort zone, I feel like, and he did something unexpected, and it was to be tame, mature, I would say subtle for him, and yet there's not a single frame of it that doesn't feel absolutely inherently Gaspar Noé. But I just like that he's focusing on mortality from a very different angle here. He's not thinking about it how he normally would. He's normally maybe looking at mortality through like a 23-year-old character that's like in a club in Berlin. But no, this is about two elderly people. So they are facing death at a completely different stage in their life, the last days of their life. And when you look at the difference between the way young people look at death and the way that old people look at death, that really changes things. And I feel like death in this movie is maybe more accepted. There's more of a calm to it. I do look at Noé as somebody who sets himself apart. Like, he doesn't only do really grim and dark movies. I feel like he always has a sense of glee and energy about him. And there's like a childlike quality to him in the way that he approaches things. He's not just rubbing our noses and in devastation. He certainly does show a lot of devastating things, don't get me wrong. I just don't feel like it's monotonous. I don't think that he's fully masochistic as a filmmaker. And I think if you say that, I think you kind of misunderstand him a bit. And so when you have a story like this, I worry that maybe he might be a little bit too monotonous, or he might not be able to create dimension in the areas that he needs to keep the story moving and such. But I don't know, this film really does have something unrelenting about it. It's not pleasant to watch. It's certainly not. And it feels like a long film. It kind of feels torturous while you're watching it. And yet I couldn't stop watching it. I felt like I have to keep watching this. There's just something about this that I'm connected to. And through that, I found facets of emotion that maybe I never had from Gaspar Noé. So, I found that very rewarding. And yes, Noé's taste for the taboo and all the neon-tinged aesthetic is something that I absolutely love for him. And I would love for him to, go back to that, but maybe from a different perspective this time. But it was nice seeing this because it's a look at him being vulnerable. It's a look at him being a little bit more personal. I always fear with great auteurs that they get stuck in a certain style that maybe they're beloved for, and people call them a genius over it. And then they start to hide behind this subversive thing that they've created rather than growing. And I feel like this is an example of somebody later in their career who is still growing, and that just really makes me happy. But yeah, so those are just a few movies that I really liked this year, and if you haven't seen them, I highly recommend them to you. Let me know what movies you've really liked this year. What am I missing? I'm sure I'm missing a ton, but yeah, let me know. I would love to hear. But that is the video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Over here, you will see my patrons. Thank you so much for your support. If you are interested in supporting, the link for that is below, as well as the rest of my social media information. You can watch more videos here, and you can subscribe if you'd like. Catch you next time.